my knees, shaking to my thigh. Post me a pic, finna make me a profit. When the liquor hit, then the get toxic.
You in the club and it's wild.
I've been lit since brunch. That order 42 for the table, let's pop. Missionaire or doggy style on my top. Hey, hating on me from the closet.
You are allowed to move forward.
Nice.
Hey, what is up YouTube? Terrence here and I'm back with another video. Like you just saw, we're going to be doing a compositing video today. We're going to be using the doll from Squid Game. I'll be doing the composite above some footage I got from Storyblocks. There's some camera tracking for the shot that we're working on, but I'm not going to be going over the camera tracking portion. I think Ian Hubert and the CG Matter did really great jobs explaining how to do camera tracking inside of Blender. So this is going to be focused mainly on the compositing aspect. I did do paint outs for 2 or 3 shots, but I'm not covering that either. Those can be separate tutorials. If you'd like to see that, let me know in the comments and I'll work on it. The first thing you need to do is create an image sequence. An image sequence is recommended because it's less work for your computer than decompressing a highly compressed video like MP4. Do this in Blender, it's very easy. Open up a new project, head to your video sequencer and simply drag in your video. The next thing, you select the amount of frames that you want and select your save location and, well, your file type and hit render. Quick tip, if you're ever trying to do a render and you have 3D in your scene as well and you can't get Blender to choose which one to render, here under post-processing, you'd select sequencer or compositor. Compositor is whatever you have in your 3D scene connected to your compositing node, and sequencer is whatever you have in your video sequencer. Your next step is tracking and solving your camera. Here you can see what the track scene looks like with all the markers. And if we should jump into the camera view, I have the footage loaded up and you can see what it looks like playing back from the camera view. So if we should say place an object in the scene, let's go ahead and grab trusty old Suzanne. You can see that she stays in place. At this point I imported my dancing doll, and to import it all I did was go to file, hit append, then I go find the Blender file and I just go to collection and selected the one that I need. In this case it was the doll. And I had the armature parented to this null object right here. And what this does, it allows me to scale the doll and move it around without affecting the keyframes or anything. Speaking of scale and the keyframes, whenever you're doing stuff inside of Blender or any 3D application, it's always good to get things at their real world size. In this case, I kind of didn't take that into consideration too much, because I knew there was no rigid body physics or any other simulations going on that would require real world sizes. It helps a lot with calculating shadows and stuff like that as well. From what I could find on Google, the doll's about 10 feet tall in real life. If you should come over here on the scene properties, you'll see under units you have unit system. Currently it's set to metric. You can switch it to imperial or metric, whichever you work with. If I should create a cube here and set it to 10 feet on the z-axis, we should pair it with a doll here. You'll see that right now she is over 20 feet tall, so she's twice her actual size. And these houses that you see here, I did a check on Google as well, and they're about 25 feet tall. Yeah, so it's just something to keep in mind. I'm gonna switch this back to metric. That whenever you're doing compositing or anything in CG, having it at real world sizes, especially if there are any simulations or physics stuff going on, is going to give a lot better results. Now back to the compositing. Just split the view and turned off the tracking points so you can have a clean view of this. Turn off the bones as well. This shot is a pretty simple one, so the only things that I needed were a shadow catcher and some lights. We only have one CG object in the scene, so getting it done wasn't that complicated. If I should turn on the floor right here that I have as my shadow catcher, you can see how it's placed in the scene. What I did was, in the edit mode, if I should jump to wireframe, all that I did was scrub through the animation and kind of lined up the floor with the floor in the actual shot. Right, so it's not going to line up perfectly, but once I get something that I'm comfortable with that tracks around in the scene okay, I stick with that. It doesn't need to be perfect since it's just a shadow catcher. It's not going to be rendered as any kind of geometry. And also, because I know that I assume the concrete here might be at a higher elevation than the grass, what I did here was I made an extrusion on one of the edges and just dropped this down a little bit lower than the concrete level. So this here is the grass, this here is the concrete. It's slightly lower, that way there's some separation in the shadow, a difference in elevation. Also, to test the lighting, I made this little garage object right here. It's a cube. I just did the inset and then extruded back this face right here. And if I should switch to the rendered view, you'll see that if I turn it on and off, it gives me a general idea if I'm getting the shadows right. On to lighting, the only thing that I have lighting this shot is an environment light, using an EXR image I got from HDRI Haven. If I should jump over here to the world properties tab, you can see that I have air_museum_playground 4K EXR. If I should go up here to the render properties and then go to film and turn off transparent, you will be able to see what it actually looks like. So this is everything that's lighting the scene. Now to get the shadow where I actually want it, what I did was just simply rotate the environment light. And to do this, it's pretty simple. I'm gonna switch this window right here to a shader editor. Once you're here, what you want to do is switch from object to world, and now you can see your world image here that says background and the world output. It's not going to have these two nodes by default. We just come in here, it's going to be looking like this. So what I did was I added in a texture coordinate node and a mapping node. I plug the generated into vector and the vector out of the mapping into the vector in for the image. And then I can rotate on the z-axis until I get my shadows where I want them. Using the little garage thingy from the camera view, I can turn it on and off and rotate until I get my shadows somewhere that matches. And since this HDRI image, or this environment image here, it has sunlight and grass and trees and that kind of stuff, it gives that suburb vibe. So it's not a complete match, but there's not really highly reflective stuff in the scene that will need a 100% accurate HDRI image. This model came from sketchfab.com by this awesome user named Rezius. I don't know, I shouldn't be saying names, I'm bad at names. But here is the 3D model. That's what it looks like. I just grabbed it, threw it into Blender, rigged it, upskirt shot, and then that was it. I was ready to animate. Pause. To be completely transparent here, I barely animated anything. I rigged the model and I got some mocap footage from Mixamo. I did a bit of cleanup. I'm not sure if I could consider that animating, but just to be 100% transparent, I suck at animating. Let's resume. So I didn't make this model, it came from Sketchfab. You can go ahead and check it out. Links in the description. For the materials, I really did nothing here because everything was already done by that awesome user on Sketchfab. I just connected all the images using the Node Wrangler plugin and everything looks okay. The next step here is view layers. If I should go up here, you can see that I have 3 view layers, all, shadow, and doll. Now if we jump to the doll layer, you'll see that we have no shadows on the floor. This thing right here, it doesn't render, so it won't be in the scene. And if we switch over to the shadow layer, you will see that there is no doll, only the shadow on the floor. And with these 2 layers, I was able to make changes to the shadows separately in the composite. I did a video some time ago on render layers inside of Blender. I'll link it here. You can go ahead and check that out. I created the 2 layers for the shadow and the doll, and then I was ready for rendering. For the all layer, I went into the view layer properties right here and I unchecked use for rendering. I did this to lessen the render times and also to remove the all option from my render layers. From here on, I went up to the render properties and I turned on film, so we have a transparent background. For sampling, I did only 100 samples and one for the minimum sample. I did a tiny bit of denoising in the actual edit. And one thing that I did here as well was for the resolution, I rendered it at 80%. Then I scaled it back up during the edit. That means you can get away with rendering a lower image and saving yourself some render time. With that done, I had my file format set to OpenEXR multi-layer. I had it set to RGB alpha. That way I have an alpha channel. And the color depth, I had that set to half. Just save your file somewhere, hit render, and meet me over in Davinci Resolve. The reason this says test render EXR is because I dragged in a single frame EXR file and did the composite inside of Fusion. Here we can have a look at what my tree looks like. Here we go. We this right here. We have the shadow layer. Right here we have the doll. And over here we have the video. 3 elements. I'll go through and explain each and every one of these nodes and how they were used. So you should go to your media pool and drag in your EXR file. It'll come in here as this media input. That's how Davinci Resolve names all the files. And up here on the inspector tab, you can select the layer that you need. I'd rendered out glossy and some other stuff that I didn't end up using anyway, so the render passes. So I just selected shadow combined, and that's what it looks like. Here I duplicated the layer and I selected doll combined. You see we have ambient occlusion and some other passes, but the combined pass works wonders. And if your pass looks crappy like this does right here, it's not showing up the colors like it should, then don't worry about that. You should pipe it through a gamut node. If I turn this off right here, you see the doll, it turns to crap. Turn it back on, pipe it through a gamut node, turn on pre-divide / post multiply, and set it to sRGB. The first one should be no change. If you take this off, you might have a white outline, so ensure pre-divide post multiply is turned on, or you may have that ugly white outline. Alright, so what I did here is first I got my shadow and I got, let's turn on this node right here. I got my shadow and I got my doll. I have the doll in the foreground and the shadow in the background. Between them I added in a Gaussian blur layer to blur the shadow all just a little bit, slightly. The color correct node here doesn't do much. It can actually be removed. It barely just shifts the contrast, and that was it. Here we have the merge node, and here is the gamut node, which I explained earlier, and then I ran them both through a resize node, resizing everything to 1920 by 1080. Remember that by default, if I should jump here, this was all, let me turn this off, this was all rendered at 80%, so the doll would have been smaller than the actual final thing. So I ran it through the resize node and had it set to 1920 by 1080. And then I added another color correct node, and this is the one that actually I used to correct some colors on the doll. I added some contrast, gave it some saturation, turned down the gain, and I messed with the little circle. I don't remember what this thing is, a hue circle, whatever this is. I messed with this a bit until I got it to look the way that I want it, until it matches pretty much with the scene. Pause, editor turns here. Something that I should have mentioned here is for the nodes in Davinci Resolve, you should mess around with pre-divide post multiply if you're getting some strange behavior. Like here on the color correct nodes, if I should turn off pre-divide post multiply and go back to the correction, let's say I drag the contrast all the way down or all the way up, you'll see that it's not only affecting the doll, but it's affecting everything that's below it as well, including the media here, which is the actual video, right? Now, if I turn pre-divide post multiply on, then it will only affect the doll. So you should be mindful of that when you're making changes to some of these nodes that affect like luminance and color and hue, that kind of stuff. If predivide post multiply is not on, you may have some strange stuff happening. The same way you get the weird outline if it's not on the gamut node. So if you don't see it on the front, just check somewhere else in the node, like options, and you should find it somewhere. All right, let's resume. And once that is done, I have this, and I consider my colors looking okay. I had planned on using some of these layers here if it didn't look the way I want to, but everything turned out fine, so I left them off. I then added a bit of sharpness with the sharpen node. You can see if I turn this off, it's a little bit of sharpness gone. So I added a bit of sharpness because I rendered only at 80%. You may or may not need this in your edit. One thing I did here was have a look at the darkest areas of the image, and I saw that the black values were 0.05 or 0.01 to 0.05 pretty much. You can find the color inspector right here under this menu. So I turned that on, I went on the doll, and I found the darkest areas, which were on her shoe right here. And I use the color corrector node to shift the contrast and the gain around until the darkest areas matches the darkest areas in the scene. That should help bring the two shots together, well, the CG and the live footage together a little bit more. Like I said before, this media in right here is the actual video. As you can see, this is a 4K video, so I added a resize node right here and had it resized to 1920 by 1080. And I added it all back to a merge node. This into the background and all of the render stuff right here into the foreground. I then piped it all through a film grain node. You can zoom in and have a look. You can see my image was fairly noisy, so adding some film grain into the shot itself, it helped to bring the CG and the real footage together. And then I had it all piped to the media out. This is where we can go back to Resolve's edit page and we see our final video here. If you're not having smooth playback, you should right click and set render fusion cache to on, and go here under the playback menu and set render cache to user. And you can see here the blue line, it's caching my video. Also, quick tip, if you should hit shift 9, sure it's the same on Mac, and go under master settings, you can scroll down until you see the optimized media and render cache. If you're having troubles with the size of your render caches or they're taking too long, you can come in here and switch all your stuff to DNxHR LB. DNxHR LB. That should create smaller files and have your caches work a little bit better, a little bit more efficient. Alright, so now that it's cached, let me turn the sound off. Now that it's cached, I can scrub through and I see the entire thing. There's one more thing that I did here, and that was on the actual color page inside Resolve. Here, let me zoom in. You can see what's going on. I have two simple nodes here, and I came in and messed with the colors a little bit. If I should disable them, then you can see what it looks like coming raw from the Fusion page. I did some corrections here to the luminance. Then I added a bit of color on this one just to mess with the colors a bit, and this is the final piece. Alright, I'm not sure if you guys would like me to get into the other shots here. This one is straight from the movie, the series. This as well. These had no VFX, just some sound design. And right here, I had the doll dancing in the background. Right here again, the doll was dancing, and in this one as well. In this shot are the exact same thing. It's just that one has a camera zoom and the other one doesn't. While this shot right here is simple and this one here is a simple one as well, I think I should explain this shot right here. It also has an error. If you should have a look at the doll's shadow, you can see that there are double shadows right here. When she's moving, the shadows are all doubled. And that is because I have two different lights in the scene here, and both of them were set to cast shadows, while only one of them should have been rendering shadows. I'll be showing you how to fix that right here, and I think I'll just go over the paint out since I'm already talking about this shot. I was just lucky, but this shot in the film was actually locked off. You can see here the guys, they barely moved in the shot, so I just got a still frame of this shot, and then I went into Photoshop and painted out, just used a clone tool to remove the doll from here and painted back in the shadow. I came here, I painted out her legs from the tree's shadow, and I kind of just made the tree branch like what you see here. It's a little bit messy around here, but it works for this shot. If we should dive into Fusion and have a look at what's going on here, you can see the setup is very similar. The only thing is that right here, this is the shadow node. You can see that right here I have this polygon that's cutting the doll's shadow out of the tree. That way we don't have double shadows. There are more convenient ways to fix this, but maybe that's for another time because I don't truly understand it myself. I'll have to look into it. So I made a mask around the tree, and since it was all still, I was able to remove parts of her shadow from casting shadows on the tree. Without it, it will look like this. We'll have the doll with some double shadows on the tree, and that wouldn't look really good. So I added this mask in and just removed parts of the shadow. As for the double shadow right here, I'm going to be showing you guys how I fixed that. Everything else here is set up just like in the other shot, and since it was a paint out, I just saved the image as 1080p, so I didn't need the resize node right here. And as for the zoom effect, I just turned on dynamic zoom, left it at linear, and had it zoom out. Here in good old Blender, if we have a look at the shot, we can see that we have a sunlight right here and the area light right here. If I should turn on the rendered view, you can see we have our painted out layer and we have the shot right here. I was experimenting with having a tree in the shot itself to kind of mimic this tree and use it as a holdout, but that didn't really work out, and I figured I could just paint it out since it was a static shot. I had this light right here because I wanted to light the model a little bit better. If I should turn this off, you can see her back's a little bit dark. I wanted some extra light right there. Now you can see the sunlight right here. If we turn this off, we still have some shadows in the scene. That is because we still have our environment light right here in the scene. To fix this, what I need to do is to come here on the sun and turn off cast shadow, and here on the area light turn off cast shadow as well. And as you can see, we will have just one shadow remaining, and that's a shadow from our environment texture, and that will be the one that we see in the scene. We won't have those double shadows anymore. Alright, that brings me to the end of this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you got something from it. I sure had a lot of fun making this little short video, and even more fun making the tutorial. Before I go, I just want to thank you guys for watching this tutorial all the way to the end, if you made it to this far. If not, thank you for watching anyways. I appreciate it. Please drop a like on the video if you liked it. Drop a dislike if you didn't. Let me know in the comments how I can improve, because this is a really small channel and I'm hoping to grow it. So any feedback, any criticism, I appreciate it. I'll use it to make my future videos better. You should hear that I talk really fast in my videos, and I'm trying to slow things down a little bit. Well, that's it for this one, guys. It's your boy Terrence, and I am out.
Nice.